In the last video, you studied color through color channels in Photoshop. It's time for us to come back and study more about the RGB and CMYK color modes. Those color modes have some things in common, but they're very different in very important ways. And it's those differences that had everything to do with what went wrong with Dr. Doggy Bowser. Remember that scientists developed the C-Lab color space from having people mix varying amounts of red, green, and blue light to match a color that scientists had placed in front of them. Scientists also evaluated all the colors that printers can print with the combinations of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink. Ink, not light. The CMYK color space includes all those printed colors. RGB and CMYK are two color spaces that have some colors in common, but they contain a very different number of colors. We'll get back to that point in just a minute. So when do you begin dealing with color spaces, color models, and color modes? Actually, as soon as you take a picture with your camera. Remember that your sensor has photosites that collect red, green, and blue color information. When you take a picture, your sensor collects your scene's light information and sends it to the microprocessor. Your camera doesn't know how you're going to use this file, so it assigns a common color model, almost always some version of RGB, to attach a scale to measure the quantity of red, green, and blue in the sensor's light information. Finally, your camera uses a color mode to display your photograph in the viewport. You set which mode your camera should use somewhere within your camera's settings. Check your camera's manual under Mode to find out what options you have. For you photographers who know this, there are a few versions of RGB color models plus a completely different file format called RAW. I'll keep those discussions for a different course. When you open a file in an image processing program like Photoshop, Corel Paint, or GIMP, the software program reads the color mode or color engine that was used to create that file. But what if you didn't take a photo that you need for a project? Stock photo agencies like Corbis, Adobe Stock, and Getty Images sell rights to photographs done by other photographers. You need to check and see in which color mode the images were saved. In Photoshop, you'll want to open an image, go up to Image, Mode, and check to see if the color mode is RGB or CMYK. If your file is in RGB, it's just like having a photograph you took with your own camera. If you go to Image, Mode, and see that your software program is using the CMYK color mode, you have fewer options and you need to be a little careful. Let's find out why. The CMYK color model is the second most common color model, and it's the color model typically used by printers. Your desktop printer is not capable of using RGB colored inks, and a commercial printer can't use red, green, or blue inks on a standard offset press machine. Printers use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black printed one after another in tiny dot patterns that simulate all the colors we see in printed photographs. Photoshop and Corel Paint use a CMYK color mode to simulate those colors on your monitor. To see the scale used in this color model, let's look again at Photoshop's color picker. In CMYK, colors are measured in percentages. 0% means there isn't any of that color in whatever the current foreground color is. 100% means there's a full amount of whatever that color is within the mix that creates the current foreground color. Let's set black to 0 for a second. Now, if cyan, magenta, and yellow are all set to 0%, we have white. I'll open a series of Photoshop files that show you the Channels panel in Photoshop. With the CMYK file, there are separate channels for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. By covering the canvas with 100% of each of the first three colors, we get the same kind of channel information we did with the RGB colors you saw in the last video. Adobe's Color Picker gives us the option of which color model we want to use to mix our new foreground color. It's important to remember that even though you can use any of these models to mix new colors, Photoshop is going to use the color mode you select under Image and Mode to display that color on your monitor. I'll create a very colorful gradient that showcases the saturation of the colors we have available in the RGB color model. Now, here's the really sad fact. Remember that I told you the RGB color space is considerably larger than the CMYK color space? Let's ask Photoshop to show us just how different these color spaces are. Look again at these colors. Now, watch what happens when I go up to Image, Mode, and come down to CMYK color. I'm asking Photoshop to change its current color engine, or color mode, to CMYK, and to remap the existing colors in this file so that only colors within the CMYK color space are displayed. This is the equivalent of seeing what will happen to my beautiful saturated colors if I were to print this file with my desktop printer using cyan, magenta, yellow, and black inks. I'll go to Control or Command Z a few times just to let you see the difference. Pretty striking, isn't it? If you've ever wondered why your beautiful sunrise or sunset photographs don't print out with the same color saturation as what you see in your camera's viewfinder, this is a big reason why. Those beautiful saturated blues, pinks, and peach colors aren't included within the CMYK color space and therefore can't be printed with CMYK inks. You can actually watch Photoshop compare colors between the RGB color space to the CMYK color space by looking in Adobe's Color Picker. Double-click on the foreground color box to open up the Color Picker. You'll see a couple of small boxes in the upper right section. Let's look more closely at the two boxes and their corresponding symbols to the right of the new and current box. The upper square has a triangle with an exclamation point above it. If you rest your cursor over that small box, you see a hint that says, "Click to select in gamut color." The term gamut here loosely means color space, such as RGB or CMYK. We'll get into color gamut more in a future video when I talk about monitor colors. For now, think about this box as a tool to select colors that belong to a specific color space. By default, the color space you see in the color picker is RGB. Right now, I'm selecting a new color to be my foreground color. But perhaps I know for certain that I'll be sending this file to press, and therefore I need to select a color that fits into the CMYK color space. The plan is to add pixels of this new color somewhere in my file, perhaps as text. There's no way to show a CMYK color picker, so Adobe gives us this little box instead. The warning triangle above the box is telling us that the color I've chosen does not fit into the CMYK color space. If my file were going to remain in the RGB color space, I wouldn't care about this warning. I'd just ignore it. But because I'm going to print this image, I want the color picker to help me find the most similar color that does fit into the CMYK color space. When I click this small box, Photoshop displays a different color in the New section of the New and Current Color rectangle. This is Photoshop's selection of a color that will fit into the CMYK color space. When I eventually change this file from RGB mode to CMYK mode before sending it to press, this color will not have to be remapped. It already fits within the CMYK color space. I want to point out that the color picker is not remapping colors as we were discussing earlier. When you choose a new color and click the gamut box, Photoshop simply selects colors that fit into a specific color space. If I'm working with my image's color mode by going up to Image and Mode, I'm asking Photoshop to take the existing colors within my photograph and alter the values of those colors. That remapping process involves behind-the-scenes computing and algorithms of immense complexity. Let's return to the discussion of that file that you might get from a stock photo agency. It could easily be a CMYK file. What does that mean to you? It tells you that the file has already been converted from its original RGB color space to the CMYK color space. When that's done, only colors that are included in the CMYK color space remain a part of that file. All the colors that fell outside the CMYK color space in the original image no longer exist. They were remapped to different colors so as to fit into that much smaller CMYK color space, just as you saw in my rainbow demonstration a few minutes ago. The good news is that your CMYK stock photograph is ready to go to press. If you're going to be printing that file, you're in really good shape. But if you plan on using it online only, you're going to miss out on some saturation and hues that were remapped by the photographer or by the company that sold you the file. What doesn't work? Well, you could convert the file to RGB by going up to Image and Mode and change the color engine to RGB. But those CMYK colors don't remap back to the original colors in the RGB color space, so you aren't going to see any change in your image. What if you're working with files that will always be online and never printed out? Keep them in RGB color mode. Now that you understand more about the RGB and CMYK color modes, you're ready to learn how to avoid some of the problems involved with digital color. Remember, I created this poster in the early days of digital printing, and everyone had a lot to learn. Even though that took place years ago, the solution is still the same. Prevention is still better than a cure. And back then, I didn't prevent anything.